Hey, what's up, y'all? Just want to take a few minutes of your time and share with you some thoughts from my devotional this morning. Yeah, I haven't done this in a very long time, and I don't know why, but this morning I found the reading inspirational. I found the reading helpful and insightful, and I thought maybe I'd share it with you all. Reading Numbers chapter 15, and the subject of immigration stood out to me. Now, why would that stand out to me? Well, I'll tell you why it stood out to me. First of all, some of you may know this about me. My mother is African American, and my father is from Jamaica. He came to America in the 60s as a migrant worker and then got his green card in the early 70s. And now, almost at the age of 86, he will have his full citizenship thanks to the help of my aunt, his younger sister. And so we're really excited about that. And so the subject of immigration hits really close to home for me. Additionally, I serve as a pastor at a church here in Lincoln, Nebraska, where we have number of members who are from different countries who are precious saints in the eyes of the Lord and who I love dearly. And then there are lots of international students that our church is involved with reaching, and many of them are members of the church as well. And so this is really, really close to home for me, really near and dear to my own heart. I love the fact that Jesus reveals himself as the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and that every nation must come to the knowledge of that truth. And that's something that really stood out to me early on in my Christian walk. And when I think about the Great Commission, that the task of the church is to make disciples of all the nations, all the ethne. And so, really, really important when I think about this subject. So, as I was reading Numbers 15, I saw some principles that I think relate to this subject that I think might be helpful for our conversation and our discussion around immigration and what's happening in our country today. First thing I want to lay out for you is some of the context and why this is so, why it stands out to me so much. First of all, Numbers chapter 14 is not a great chapter in the history of Israel, right? God had taken them out of Egypt. They are on the precipice of entering the promised land, and they send out these spies who are secretly spying the promised land for 40 days, and then they come back and they give a report to the rest of the people. And you guys remember, 10 of the 12 spies had a negative report. And so chapter 14 is not a great chapter. In fact, God, as a result of the unbelief and hardness of heart of the people, in chapter 14, he consigns the Israelites to 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And so that's why chapter 15 stands out so much when I consider the references to the resident alien. And so let me read the passage that caught my attention here. God is giving some statutes relating to various sacrifices, whether it was the burnt offering or an offering for a vow or a free will offering, whatever the case may be. God, he commands Moses to pen this as a statute binding upon the people, and in it I saw some principles relating to immigration. It says in verse 13 of chapter 15 that every native born person must do these things in this way to present an offering made by fire as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So that's speaking to the Israelite. In verse 14, if a resident foreigner is living with you, or whoever is among you in future generations, and prepares an offering made by fire as a pleasing aroma to the Lord, he must do it the same way you are to do it. One statute must apply to you who belong to the congregation and to the resident foreigner who is living among you as a permanent statute for your future generations. You and the resident foreigner will be alike before the Lord. One law and one custom must apply to you and to the resident foreigner who lives alongside you. Wow, that just stood out to me. Again, chapter 14, they're consigned to the wilderness. And yet, this passage in chapter 15 is anticipating dealing with the problem of immigration. Now, I think it also anticipates this problem Obviously, it anticipates this problem, but I think it also addresses an existing potential problem. As Israel is wandering the wilderness, I believe that whether it were caravans traveling to and fro, or the family and friends of Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, that word got out that God, the presence of God, was with Israel in the wilderness, and that people were drawn to that. I think so. I think that this, quite frankly, was addressing a small immigration problem happening among Israel at that particular time, but it's also anticipating that this problem would become a larger issue for Israel as they settle into the promised land. And again, people being drawn to the very presence of God among his people. Now, that's key to this immigration problem. The presence of God is what is drawing the people to want to be a part of Israel and its life. The presence of God, and with the presence of God, the assumption of the protection and the prosperity that would come from being so near to the presence of God. Now, why did that stand out to me? Well, the passage says that there was one law that would govern the people of Israel and the resident foreigner, the person drawn to the fact that God was near to Israel and that God was good to Israel, that person would want to submit to and live under the same rule of law that was governing Israel. That is really, really key for the conversation on immigration. Related to that is our own problems in our current context. We are drawing people. We are drawing people to America, and let me say this from the onset, that if I weren't a citizen of this country, if I was a citizen of another country, I would want my country to be so prosperous and doing so well that it would indeed draw others to it. But I would want them to be drawn not just simply for the fact of the prosperity and the seeming success of the country, but based on what we see with Israel, that the presence of God is there, that God is among his people there, and that they would want to be a part of it. Now, I know there's some conversations about, okay, we need to see this as it relates to the church, not necessarily in terms of a nation, but there are immigration principles here that apply that I think we need to consider. Um, so, before I get to them, let's talk about this problem, this issue in our context, and why people are drawn to our nation. Well, it's not so much because we have exalted the rule of Christ over our nation, but it's because we have exalted prosperity and we have exalted the illusion of autonomy. And that's why people are drawn to this nation. Um, Prosperity is pretty obvious. I mean, America, no matter, the economy may fluctuate, in the eyes of Americans, your your investments and their values may fluctuate here and there, but overall, we know that we are a pretty prosperous nation. So that I don't need to say much more about that. And that's attractive to people wanting to have a better life. Um, but it's the illusion of autonomy. Now, what do I mean by autonomy? When I say autonomy, I simply mean a social experiment uh, predicated on free will. Um, in other words, be whatever you want to be, do whatever you want to do, feel free to pursue whatever your heart desires. That kind of thinking, that kind of reality. And it's a conflating of freedom with this idea that there shouldn't be any kind of law or restriction to hinder whatever I want to do or whatever I desire to do in my heart. And that's simply a wrong way of thinking about freedom. Freedom comes in the context of law. Law protects freedom. Law ensures that you have freedom. But autonomy obliterates law, it obliterates boundaries. And so people are drawn to this idea that there's an illusion to autonomy, that you can come, you can enjoy the prosperity, and you can do whatever you want to do. And so that's created a lot of problems. That's created a lot of confusion. That's made people pick up the talking points and the emotional baggage surrounding all of the political talking points on this subject, and it's gotten us off course. What we saw in the passage here is that there was to be one law, one custom, one statute for Israel and the resident foreigner, and that would bring freedom to both. And so that would imply that the foreigner has to accept and embrace that law because he's drawn because of the presence of God. And with the presence of God, yes, the protections of God and the prosperity that follow being so near to God. And by prosperity, I'm not just talking about material prosperity, but prosperity in every aspect of life, in our relationships, family, health, and things like that. And I'm not a wealth and prosperity preacher, by the way. I'm just saying that this is a reality, right? That there's a blessing that comes with being, um, you know, in the presence of God that we see among the people of God in the Old Testament here. And the same thing applies in our context that we want people to come. And I know many who have come here who are God-fearers, who have no problem, no issue whatsoever with the rule of law because they love God and they understand the relationship of law and freedom. But there are some, because here in America we've promoted this idea, this illusion of autonomy, that we've attracted some who feel like that they can continue the same lawless activities and way of living that they had in their previous country, that they can do that here as well. And that's really because we've sort of promoted that. Do you be whatever you want to be, you know, pursue your heart's desire, that sort of thing. But the text reminds us that there is a goodness to law that protects and preserves life. And it starts with surrendering and submitting to God. And so, as a nation, I think that's really the biggest issue, right? Will we be a nation that prioritizes the lordship of King Jesus above everything else? I mean, that's what we're working for. That's what we're wanting to see happen. We want to see hearts won to Him. You know, that people would bow the knee to their Savior who died for them, who loves them, who gave His life for them, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal. But this subject um, of immigration, I just found it interesting coming on the heels of chapter 14 of Numbers to find it in chapter 15. Just really struck me as odd, but yet also an indication that God was still drawing people to Himself, and that God still intended to bring His blessings upon people, even rebellious Israel, but also to the foreigners. They could get in on it if they would embrace God's ways, if they would embrace the rule of law over that land. And I think that's what we want for people to be drawn to this nation. We want to send out missionaries to different nations, but we also want people to be drawn to this nation, but also to be drawn to the good rule of law that makes freedom and prosperity and all these things that people want, that makes it possible. So anyway, those are some of the thoughts that I had, that were inspired by this passage this morning. Um, Thank you for being patient and listening. God bless you.